Mr. Mayor and City Council persons and Mr. McDonald. I'm glad to speak in opposition. I am the neighbor next door.
Your name, sir?
My name is J.E. Freeland, and I reside at 815 West C Street, the property which is to the west and adjacent to the right-of-way. If you look at the exhibit, my home is the flat white roof on the west side of the right-of-way. And my property is unique insofar as that with the configuration of this development, I'm kind of the one with the long property parcel that's landlocked. And so we rely upon the right-of-way for our home. We have a lower basement apartment, and the ingress and egress is accessed off, and historically has been since the home was built in 1956. And also, I have great concern because the fire hydrant, which services our properties, is in front of the 807 property. And to restrict the access for city fire personnel to my whole property would be affected by a favorable decision. So years ago I had Mr. Button. I've lived here for 16 years. I had Chief Button, who was the fire chief here. Many of you may know him. And he came out personally at my request, and he measured out, he looked over the whole property. He showed me where the fire hydrant was and how far the hoses could reach. And they do reach through this corridor, through this right-of-way, to the rear of my property. However, my property is so long, it goes all the way down to the alley. It's kind of the long, narrow property in this development. The fire hoses could not reach. There's an outbuilding, and further, the large trees, most of which are 150 feet tall, 120 feet tall, that were planted there in the 50s. And so, at any rate, to the extent that this change would affect my property, I'm concerned.
Okay. Would you please wrap it up, sir?
Yes, we also had a fire in one of the trees a few years ago, and I called the city. City called Avista, and there was a smoldering fire because the lines were, one of them fell, the live wire, and set the tree on fire. Avista had to come out and repair that. They needed with all their personnel, they needed the full extent of this right-of-way. And I'm concerned that also that this is, I've met my neighbors and I like them very much, but I think this is not in the public interest. There's an historic reason why this right-of-way has existed.
Mr. Freeland, I'm going to stop you, sir, because we're over 4 minutes, but I do have a question to ask. Is that the property you're talking about that's yours?
Yes, it is.
So this is C Street.
Yes.
So you've got access to your house from the front of the street, isn't that correct? You have access to the front of that, off the front of that house to the street right up there?
I do, yes. That's not the question. The question
No, I
is
was just
access.
asking you a question.
Yes.
You said that your lot goes way down
It
into
does.
here somewhere, and that's what your
Correct.
concern is these trees right here.
Well, also, in the lower basement of my home is the furnace, there's a kitchen. If those ever caught on fire, I need the city personnel to be able to respond appropriately. And also, I'm just concerned that I've read the petition, and I'm just concerned that this is really not in the public interest, but it's a unjust enrichment. And I think that, I don't know if the city really has the legal.
Mr. Freeland, I'm going to ask you to stop. Thank you. You've talked for over 5 minutes, and I restricted
thank-
to 3,
thank
so I
you,
gave you
Mr.
plenty
Mayor.
of time, but I did have a question I wanted to ask you, so
Yes.
thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Okay.
I would be more than happy to take other testimony up front here.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, Jon Freeland. It's my dad. I grew up in that house there. I think the bigger issue is here, beyond the city right-of-way, is that lot right behind the house there could potentially be divided for another house in the future. And if that right-of-way, if their request was granted, I'm not sure that the alley could still be constructed. It's true that it's a little bit steep coming off of there, down if you go a little bit down the alley in terms of the property. But when Ed came out years ago, we were thinking about, selling the house and getting a different house in town at that point in time. And he said that if we were to sell it and also sell the lot behind, we would have to construct an alley and be cut from the C Street there down for property access to that lot based on where that fire hydrant is. Because if you see, the lot extends all the way down to that alley. You can kind of see the line there right before the gravel, like, 3/4 of the way down the picture there. And there's no fire hydrant anywhere near the southern part of the property there. So in terms of fire access, for us to potentially seek to divide the property in the future and get value out of that piece of land, as the guy next door said, in a tight housing market, potentially building another building another house there, having a different property there. In terms of fire access, we need to have the alley preserved as it currently is. So I would ask less if, potentially that, if that 1 foot would restrict, fire access to that property, and that might be a question for the new fire chief as well. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. I'm in opposition until I hear a good argument or my concerns are addressed. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Other testimony? Okay, I'll close the hearing. Oh,
No, we have somebody coming.
come on up, ma'am, if you want to. Tell us your name and your address, please.
Hi, my name is Mary Ingles. My husband is Eric Middlestead. So I'm petitioner on this request. Just a couple of points of clarification, I think, and perhaps this is really a question for Les, but I believe that the access to the fire hydrant, that is city property that goes from the front of our property to the edge of the street. And so in my understanding, there would be no restriction or restricted access to that fire hydrant. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Les.
Yeah, that is correct. The fire hydrant is within the C Street right-of-way, so it runs along that area. It's either within or very near to, but typically they are within the C Street right-of-way, and so there should not be any hindrance to access to the hydrant from the street.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, as my husband stated, the vacation request is this desire to bring us into compliance with the current city regulations. We have no plans to do any kind of development on that 1.17 feet of property. We also are happy to ensure that there is easement for anybody who actually needs to make use of that. for fire access, for utility access, for whatever, however it needs to be used. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ingles.